The old journal lay open on the dusty oak desk, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. A single shaft of moonlight pierced the gloom of the forgotten attic, illuminating a faded ink drawing of a creature with too many eyes and a grin that promised unspeakable horrors. I'd stumbled upon this attic and this journal quite by accident, a consequence of my insatiable curiosity and a persistent draft whispering through the floorboards of my inherited ancient manor. The manor itself was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, rumored to have stood for centuries, witnessing more than its fair share of joy and, undoubtedly, sorrow. My ancestor, the journal's author, was a recluse, a scholar of the arcane, and, by the looks of these scribblings, a man who delved into realms best left undisturbed. The air in the attic was thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something sharp and metallic, like old blood. I'd been drawn here by a feeling, a prickling sensation on my skin, a sense of being watched, even though I was utterly alone. The journal spoke of a vast collection, a menagerie of the mythical, the monstrous, the creatures that populated the fevered dreams of mankind and the hushed whispers of ancient lore. It called them the aberrations, and it detailed their supposed imprisonment within the very foundations of this house, a safeguard against their unchecked power. The author claimed to have gathered them, to have cataloged their unique horrors, and to have, in his misguided arrogance, bound them to the manor, hoping to study them, to understand the very essence of fear they embodied. But as I read further, a chilling realization began to dawn. The journal was not just a catalog, it was a chronicle of a descent, a gradual surrender to the very darkness he sought to control. He wrote of whispers in the walls, of shadows that danced just beyond the periphery of vision, of dreams that bled into reality, populated by the very beings he had so diligently documented. The entry before me detailed his encounter with the first of his captives, a creature he named the Grief Weaver. He described it as a being born from collective sorrow, its form constantly shifting, mimicking the faces of lost loved ones, its touch leaving behind an unbearable ache, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of comfort could fill. He wrote of how it fed on despair, growing stronger with every tear shed, every mournful sigh. The ink was smudged in places, as if his hand had trembled violently as he penned these words. I felt a cold draft snake around my ankles, though the windows were sealed shut. A floorboard creaked upstairs, a heavy, deliberate sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself it was just the old house settling, the wind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a tangible pressure against my consciousness. The journal continued, its passages growing more fragmented, more desperate. He moved on to the chronoparasite, a creature that did not feed on flesh or fear, but on time itself. It was described as a being of pure temporal distortion, capable of unraveling moments, of stealing years, leaving its victims as withered husks or eternally trapped in fleeting seconds. The author recounted a harrowing experience where he found himself reliving the same agonizing minute for what felt like an eternity, the chronoparasite feeding on his panic, his futile attempts to escape the loop. He wrote of the chilling sensation of watching his own life slip through his fingers, of the dread that gnawed at him as he realized the creature's ultimate goal was not just to consume his time, but to erase his very existence from the tapestry of reality. The ink here was darker, almost black, a stark contrast to the faded sepia of the earlier entries. I heard a faint scratching sound, like nails on wood, coming from the far corner of the attic. It was rhythmic, insistent, and it was getting closer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. I wanted to close the journal, to flee this suffocating space, but an unseen force held me captive, an invisible tether to these morbid revelations.
The author's pen then scratched out the description of the whisper wind sylph, a being of pure sound, invisible and intangible, that haunted the minds of its victims with seductive lies and terrifying truths. It didn't physically harm, but it eroded sanity, twisting perceptions, turning loved ones into enemies, and sowing seeds of doubt that blossomed into madness. He wrote of the maddening whispers that followed him everywhere, the insidious suggestions that preyed on his deepest insecurities, the paranoia that festered until he could no longer distinguish between reality and the sylph's wicked creations. The sounds in the attic intensified. The scratching was now accompanied by a faint, sibilant murmur, a chorus of indistinct voices that seemed to coil and uncoil around me. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the whisper seemed to emanate from within my own skull. The next creature detailed was the umbral serpent, a colossal serpentine entity that dwelled in the deepest shadows, its scales absorbing all light, its eyes burning with an ancient malevolent intelligence. It was said to be a guardian of forgotten knowledge, a devourer of souls that dared to trespass its domain. The author described it as a creature that could manipulate darkness itself, weaving illusions of terror. Its venom not poison, but a chilling despair that paralyzed its victims, rendering them helpless to its inevitable consuming embrace. He spoke of the suffocating darkness that filled the manor, a darkness thicker than any natural shadow, a darkness that seemed to press in on him, to steal his breath. The author's handwriting became a frantic scrawl, barely legible. He described how the umbral serpent's presence seemed to amplify the other creature's powers, feeding their malevolence, making the manor a true nexus of terror. The whispers in the attic grew louder, more distinct, coalescing into a single guttural growl that vibrated through the floor. The moonlight, which had seemed so comforting moments ago, now felt weak, impotent, swallowed by an encroaching darkness that originated not from the windows, but from within the room itself. I could feel a chilling presence, a cold so profound it felt like being submerged in ice water. Then came the entry that made my blood run cold. The phantasmagoria, a creature that was not a single entity, but a manifestation of collective fear. It could adopt any form, mimic any terror, and its only weakness was the absence of its prey's imagination. The author wrote of the horrors it had conjured for him, faces of his deepest nightmares made flesh, the echoing screams of those he had wronged, the crushing weight of his own failures manifested as grotesque, lumbering beasts. He described how the phantasmagoria thrived on his terror, growing larger, more potent with every surge of panic. The ink here was smeared as if by tears, or perhaps something more viscous and dark. The scratching sound had stopped, replaced by a wet, slurping noise, as if something was slowly being dragged across the floorboards. The shadows in the attic seemed to writhe, to coalesce into indistinct shapes that flickered at the edge of my vision. I could feel a phantom breath on my neck, a cold, moist exhalation that smelled of the grave. The journal's final entries were a testament to utter despair. The author, once a scholar, now a prisoner in his own meticulously crafted prison, wrote of his attempts to appease the creatures, to bargain with them, to offer them what he thought they desired. But these creatures were not driven by simple desires. They were embodiments of primal fear, of cosmic dread. He described the void maw, a creature that existed not in space, but in the absence of everything, a gaping silent void that consumed not matter, but meaning, hope, and sanity. It was said to be the ultimate predator, the final end, a black hole of despair that could swallow the very concept of existence. The author wrote of experiencing its presence as a profound emptiness, a terrifying realization that nothing mattered, that all effort was in vain, that the universe was ultimately devoid of purpose. The ink was almost entirely gone, the page nearly blank, save for a few desperate, illegible smudges. The slurping sound was closer now, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic pulsing, like a diseased heart beating. The oppressive darkness in the attic seemed to deepen, to solidify, forming tangible walls that pressed in on me. I looked at the final drawing in the journal. It was unlike the others. It was not a detailed sketch, but a chaotic scribble of jagged lines and swirling ink, a representation of something that defied form, something that existed beyond the boundaries of comprehension. Below it, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "They are not confined, they are unbound, and I am their gate." Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way. It wasn't a collapse, it was a deliberate opening, a yawning chasm that appeared as if the very fabric of reality had been torn asunder. From this abyss, a lightless void pulsed, a palpable absence that sucked the air from my lungs. The whispering voices, the scratching, the slurping, the pulsing, they all emanated from this opening. And then I saw it, or rather, I felt its presence. It wasn't a visual spectacle, it was an assault on my very being. It was the Unraveler, a creature that was not born, but that simply was. An entity of pure entropy, a being that existed to dismantle, to deconstruct, to reduce all things to their fundamental meaningless components. It was the embodiment of the Void Maw, but infinitely more terrifying because it was active, it was aware, and it was hungry. It didn't have eyes or a mouth or limbs. It was a presence, a feeling of absolute nullity, a crushing weight of non-existence. The air around it shimmered, not with heat, but with the distortion of reality itself. It pulled at me, not with physical force, but with an existential suction, a siren song of oblivion. I felt my thoughts fragmenting, my memories dissolving, my sense of self eroding. The grief weaver's sorrow, the chronoparasite's stolen time, the whisper wind sylph's insidious lies, the umbral serpent's suffocating darkness, the phantasmagoria's manifested nightmares. They were all just whispers in the face of this ultimate emptiness. The Unraveler was the progenitor, the source, the final destination of all fear. It was the creature that made all others seem like insignificant shadows. It was the ultimate horror, the one that made the concept of fear itself seem trivial, because it promised the utter cessation of all feeling, all being. My ancestor hadn't collected monsters. He had inadvertently become the architect of their reunion, the key that unlocked the ultimate insatiable hunger. The moonlight in the attic winked out, not extinguished, but absorbed, consumed by the encroaching non-existence. The last thing I perceived before everything dissolved into an infinite silent void was the unsettling realization that my ancestor's final entry was not a confession of defeat, but a chilling testament to his ultimate understanding. The most terrifying creature in any myth, any legend, any nightmare is not the one that devours you, but the one that erases you, the one that makes you question if you ever existed at all. The old journal lay open, its pages now blank, the drawings gone, the ink dissolved, leaving behind only the scent of dust and an echoing silence that was more profound, more terrifying than any scream. And as the last vestiges of my consciousness were unraveled, I understood the true horror of the collection. It was not the monsters that were kept apart, but the fact that they were all facets
of the same ultimate emptiness, and my ancestor, in his quest for knowledge, had opened the door for the greatest, most terrifying of them all to finally step into a world that was, and always would be, utterly unprepared for its own demise. The attic, the manor, the world, all just transient ripples in the face of the Unraveler's eternal, all-consuming void. And the journal, the testament to fear, was now a silent, empty monument to the ultimate horror, the absence of everything, the perfect, terrifying stillness that awaited us all.